안녕하세요. 안녕하세요. 잘 들리세요?
네네.
좋아요.
좀 지연이 있어서 잘 들립니다.
Good afternoon. Welcome to session 17. My name is Arum Kang, and I'm the assistant professor at Chungnam National University, and I'll be serving as a moderator today. Each presenter will have 20 minutes for the presentation and 10 minutes for the question and answer. For the question, the audience can speak either in English or Korean. So if you speak in Korean, we have a translator in order to translate Korean to English. And for the reminder of time limits for each presenter, I will use chat in Zoom. Okay, then let's get started. The first presenter is Ibru Tucker from Arizona National University. The title of talk is Comparative Analysis of Anger and Happiness Emotion Words in Korean Metaphor Across Genres, a Quantitative Corpus Techniques. Especially although Ms. Tucker have an emergent health problem, we are deeply appreciated for your dedication to attending the conference.
Thank you. Thank you so much. 안녕하세요. 저는 애리조나 주립대학에서 온 에브루 투케르라고 합니다. 네, 일단 share 하겠습니다. 네, okay. So today's talk is a quantitative analysis of a comparative of an anger and happiness emotion words in Korean and metaphors across genre. So for those of you who have studied metaphor, probably you are familiar with Zoltan Quexes. He published numerous studies in the framework of the conceptual metaphor theory for studying emotion metaphors. And most of the research on emotion lexicon and the figurative language of emotions in Korean has worked within this framework, including myself. And often case we identify and examine basic and or cultural specific emotion metaphors of Korean and their counter conceptual underpinnings and how these are intertwined with cultural values and folk models. So far up to date, to my knowledge, no study has investigated metaphors' textual functions or considered the role of context, genre, and register in the use of figurative language. And there is a need for discourse-based and genre-based metaphor research. So the present study explores how the use of emotion metaphors is related to genre by examining whether figurative expressions employing emotion metaphors are used selectively across genres in written data of modern Korean. Genre is defined as specific text type used by a specific community of speakers for specific purposes, may provide a blueprint for studying metaphor in a comprehensive way. And over the last 2 decades, numerous studies on metaphor and metonymy has been studied within cognitive strength. And the last, I believe, 2 decades, we also have additional strat that studies figurative language in particular contexts such as genres or registers, and also particular discourse domains such as education, health, and etc. So some findings of prior studies that are quite influential in this strat is coming from Goldley 2011. He compared the rate of novel to conventional linguistic metaphors in 6 different genres. And he found that poetry had the highest rate of novel forms, followed by magazine, advertising, modern novels, and popular science, with news reports and conversations having the lowest rates. He claimed that metaphors plays roles in filling lexical gaps or in describing specialized concepts for non-specialized audiences to support lexical cohesion in all the genres. Another influential study is coming from Steen et al. In 2010, identified metaphor-related words in different genres such as fiction, conversation, news reports, and academic writing by utilizing British National Corpus. And they found that academic written text to manifest the highest number of metaphor-related words, followed by news reports, fiction, and conversation in descending order. They argued that the difference can be accounted for by the function of the language, particularly whether the language is involved versus informational, and whether the information is abstract versus non-abstract. Also, they further argued that as part of speech interacts with metaphoricity in general, genre variance by itself cannot be considered the sole factor in metaphor frequency. So for this study, the main purpose is to examine whether the type and frequency of emotion metaphor used in Korean is affected by genre. I have two research questions. Is the frequency of occurrence of Korean emotion metaphors affected by genre? And does the frequency of occurrence of Korean emotion metaphors change over time? The analytical approach is modeled on my previous study that I conducted in 2013. And that study was on 3 emotion concepts: anger, happiness, and sadness. And the present study employs this domain mapping theoretical model, expanding it to genre-based and duration-based quantitative analysis. So in terms of method, I used again the corpus, the Sejong corpora with both DVD and online resources, and organized and modified based on the indexes of untagged data. And the index, as some of you would know, provide information such as the name of the source, year of the publication, word count, and so on. So for the target words, I use the most frequently used lexical items, 화 and 분노 for anger, and 행복 and 기쁨 for happiness. And the metaphor-related words were retrieved from the corpus, and I used AntConc program as a search engine. And I also followed the metaphor identification procedure followed by the Progress Group 2007. So in order to obtain the most frequently occurring expressions, only items within a token frequency of 20 or more were kept for further analysis. This step resulted in identification of 4 most frequent figurative expressions for each of the 4 keywords. And I also organized them in terms of their source, text, the name of the source text, publication year, the genre of the source text, the source text word count, and etc. So as such, 한남 가는 길, 1922, it's a novel, and the whole source contains 59,000 and sort of words. And only items in text published in between 1980s and 2004. 2004 was the last for the final year for this entry, and before 1980s, there weren't that much material in the corpora. So for the initially, I compared the Sejong corpus, and so it had a total of approximately 34 million ojol, with a total occurrence of 815 source type occurrences from the period of 1980s and 2004. And it contained genres from book, newspaper, novel, essay, magazine, and other as such. And first, the comparison of the corpus data and the study's data subset in terms of the tokens and text. So these are the percentage of the text. It is declining order, book as the highest, and newspaper followed by other genres. Whereas for the expressions that I found in these texts, so their percentages were as such, so similar to the previous one, highest percentage for the book, and then it goes down by novel and newspaper and so forth. Of course, we cannot compare the absolute observed absolute frequencies due to the different sizes of the data sets. Furthermore, considering that not all sources contain equal number of word frequencies, the most appropriate way to compare the two data sets is to use their normalized frequencies suggested by Bryce 2010, and that is normalized frequencies per 1 million words were calculated for the source text as well as tokens in both Sejong data set and the study data set. The comparison of these normalized scores showed with a paired sample t-test showed a significant difference between the Sejong data set and the study data set. And for the statistical distribution of the mean scores here, so we find only the number of source texts in which Korean emotion expressions occur is significantly less in the case of only essay and novel and also other genres. And in terms of the years comparison, the first figure shows the Sejong years. As you can see, it doesn't distribute equally across genres, and also it doesn't distribute equally across years too. And so some of the genres, in fact, actually just book and newspaper, it included in 1980s, and the rest of the genres was started mostly after 1990. And this also affects the findings of this particular study. As you can see, there is only 2 genres the first 10-year period, and then the rest appeared later on. So, so the 4 high occurrence of these metaphor expressions were for Hwa and Punno. These are the number of occurrences for these 4 expressions, which has 20 or more higher frequencies. 화가 치밀다, 화가 치솟다, 화를 참다, 화가 풀리다, and so forth for the punno, as you can see here. And for the happiness metaphors, 행복, I have an occurrences of 177, and 기쁨, as you can see, is the highest one. And these are the expressions that detected the highest occurrences of 20 or higher in the corpora. So some examples for anger metaphors and also happiness metaphors as such from different genres. So, so the comparison of anger and happiness metaphors, several analyses using the normalized frequencies were then conducted in order to determine whether there is a difference in the frequency of use of the data of the combined set of 4 figurative expressions between 2 alternative keywords for each emotion across genres. And if so, in which of the 6 genres the difference appears, and whether there is a difference in frequency of use in each genre of the combined set of 4 expressions with each individual keyword. So 2x4 ANOVA was conducted, and to compare the keyword main effect, genre main effect, and keyword and genre interaction effect. So as you can see, the main scores of punno and Hwa, this difference was significant for the keywords. So Hwa metaphors occurred statistically higher rate than the punno metaphors. And for genre, they also showed a significant effect for the difference. So the results show that the frequency mean score of Hwa metaphors is statistically significantly different than the frequency mean score of punno metaphors. Also, there are significant differences among the genre, meaning there are significant differences in metaphors with Hwa and metaphors with Hwa, punno, are distributed across 6 genres. So the blue line shows Hwa, and the red line shows Punno metaphors. And by looking at the Hwa, as you can see, the highest metaphors occur in book genre, followed by novel genre, whereas Punno metaphors were quite low compared to the other ones. And the difference between these two, between Hwa and Punno, as you can see, this huge gap. So it only occurs in that particular one, and that is the significant when we compare Punno and Hwa metaphors. So lastly, 2 separate one-way ANOVA tests were conducted to compare the frequency scores mean difference in the 6 genre types, so individually. And the post-hoc reveals that the mean score of the book genre is significantly higher than the mean score of the magazine, newspaper, and the other genres. Also, the mean score of novel genre is significantly different than the mean score of the magazine and the other genres. But for Punno, no significant difference detected in frequencies across genres. So Hwa metaphors occur more frequently in books and novels in other genres, whereas Punno metaphors occur at similar rates at all genres. So I guess I need to hurry a little bit. So this wasn't included, but I just wanted to show you for individual expressions how they occur differently across genres. So for the happiness, the same analysis was conducted, but there was no significant difference found in between these two mean scores. That means they occur at the similar frequency rates. The results show that while the frequency mean scores of Kippum and Hanbok metaphors are not different from each other, there are significant differences among their mean scores in different genres. And with respect to their with their comparison, so as you can see, the red one, Kippum, occurred the most in book, and also Hanbok was occurred the most in novel genres. And when we compare their mean frequencies, the difference found in newspaper and novel genres. Newspaper occurred more in Kippum, whereas novel, Hanbok metaphors occurred more in novels. And again, the one-way analysis showed for the Hanbok, it shows a statistical difference among genres, and both for Kippum and for Hanbok. So the results show that the frequency occurrence of figurative expressions with Hanbok and Kippum are not different from each other. In addition, the figurative expressions with Hanbok occur most frequently in the novel and book genres. And on the other hand, metaphors with Kippum are more frequent in the book and newspaper genres. And this is the distribution with respect to individual expressions. So, with respect to time, I believe there is also significant difference with respect to times for the anger. So I would like to just show you the graph. So, Hwa metaphors are presented from 1980s, while Punno metaphors do not occur until 1985. Right? And for the happiness metaphor, again, the year effect was significant. And as you can see, even though they don't have mean difference, but their occurrences show differences across years. Some years, there is more use for the Kippum metaphors, but some years it was the reverse. So what does a genre approach to emotion tells us? To me, at the beginning, from the beginning, the importance of using well-balanced corpus to research genres. Sejong corpus contains a very few different genres before 1990s, and even from 1990 through 2004, the data entries for different genres are distributed unevenly. In order to manage this inconsistency, the study employed naturalized frequency scores and not raw scores throughout. This method facilitates obtaining robust results in genre analysis. However, if there is no entries, then you cannot do much on this. So with respect to occurrences of figurative expressions across years, source text that included the target, anger, and figurative happiness, figurative expressions did not consistently occur in all 6 genres. Some years showed an occurrences of the expressions in some genres. The result is closely again related with the structure of the Sejong data, and because it did not distributed homogeneously across years as well. So genre-based analysis of anger, as a result, comparing the mean scores of the frequency of occurrences of figurative expressions for anger, the study determined that figurative expressions with hwa occurred more frequently than those with punno. And when broken down, the only significant difference was the book genre comparing hwa and punno. And hwa metaphors occurred more in both book and novel genres, while for punno, we did not find any significant difference by genre. The study also revealed the year difference, as I've already explained. For happiness, the study showed no difference in overall mean frequency scores between Kippum and Hanbok, but the result revealed significant differences across genres, particularly for the novel and newspaper. I've shown that Kippum occurred more frequently in novel genres and less frequently in the newspaper than figurative expressions with Hanbok. So again, the year I've explained both frequently inoccurrent in 90s, 80s, but then from 1990s until 2004, their frequency trajectories showed recurrently reversed rises and falls for a short period of times. This study demonstrated that the most common text types in which figurative expressions appear overall are the nonfiction book and novel genres, while newspapers, essays, and magazines are not common genres for anger and happiness figurative expressions. Of course, we need to acknowledge the limitations of the study, as I collect only those expressions that has these keywords. So I wasn't able to look at the other type of emotion metaphors related to this. For future study, I'm quite interested in finding out whether and how the meanings and functions of figurative expressions change or develop within or across year. And the possible way to do it is to look at recontextualization suggested by Linnell's 2019 to find alternative meanings or meaning shift motivated by the reuse of metaphors across genres. The main findings of the study is that the frequency of occurrence of emotion metaphors does vary across genres. On the basis of the previous theoretical studies on genres, the current study provides an initial empirical data analysis that compares a number of frequently occurring figurative expressions with 2 keywords in anger metaphors and 2 keywords in happiness metaphors. As most of the existing studies on metaphors are restricted to exploring mapping relations, this study I suggest for the need to expand further studies on the types of metaphorical expressions likely appear in different genres. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. So we have 5 minutes for the question and answer. For the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. May I have a short question?
Sure.
Yeah.
We have one question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
To translate, yeah, okay. Yeah. I will type in Zoom. Yes.
Do we have one question?
네. Yes, but again, I'm sure there are other factors, but I mean, we can't decide. I mean, my result came out that way. There is a difference, different genre types. It looks like it's effective using different type of figurative expressions. But I think that shouldn't be the only one decided factors. I'm sure there are different factors that we use accordingly. And again, my presentation is just based on 2 keywords for each emotions. It would be, of course, better to make it more to look more expressions, not just 분노화 or 기쁨 or 행복. So other keyword analysis or even expressions, metaphors, emotion metaphor that doesn't include these lexical items should be researched, but only with this limited keyword analysis, although those are the most frequently used keywords for these emotions. I recommend to expand it for further expressions as well. Yeah. But my analysis showed that, yes, it differs across different genres, yes.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, actually, I have one live question. So could you
Sure.
go back to the slide containing the figure 1 and 2?
Oops. Figure 1 and 2. The Sejong slide?
Yeah, right. Yes.
So the table or the figure?
Figure.
The figure.
Yes.
For the year?
Yeah. Yes.
This one?
Yes, right. I was wondering why the Sejong data set only have a high frequency in the magazine in 1990s. So is there any special reason?
I don't know, but it looks like the genre types they didn't consider including equal number of genres for each year. So so for this type of study, that's why I wanted to first make sure how the data look like, because your result is very closely related. But on the other hand, for this type of analysis, it shows a difference. So that means it doesn't mean that just because there is more entries for the book, or just because there is more entries for the essay, will be resulting that there will be more. So it can be also less. So here, so for these ones, they didn't show any difference, significant difference, but these two, three genres, metaphorical expressions appear significantly less. So, but again, so I think for those scholars who are building, who are working on compiling new corpora, it is very important to include these entries, not in a randomly, like with respect to time or genre, but in the equal amounts. I'm sure there were newspapers. I mean, these papers were always there, but I'm sure there were novels like in 1980s, right? So I wonder why they didn't include, or magazines. I'm sure there were magazines, but again, maybe they had copyright issue or other issues. But so for this type of studies, it's also good to check with a secondary corpus. Maybe another type of corpus, so compare the result in both 2 or 3 types of corpus. I know it's a lot of work, but I think it is very important to check the structure of the corpus, how it looks like. And even before 1980s, there were not enough entry, very random and very few. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Oh, thank you for your great talk. Okay, great. So now let's move on to our next presentation. Okay, our next presenter is Rilia Ben Manzoor from Zenduva University. And the title of talk is Diglossic Language Use and Changing Cognitive Structures in the Tunisian Context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. And I want to start by thanking you all for having me and for your presence. So the title of my presentation is Diagnostic Language Use and Changing Cognitive Structures in the Tunisian Context. So this presentation centers around the main term, which is diaglossia, coined by Charles Ferguson in 1959, in which 2 varieties of the same language coexist in one speech community. One variety is the H variety, which is the high variety used for formal situations like speeches, news, writing, formal writing, etc., while the other variety is the L or low variety, which is used for informal conversations such as talking with family and friends, etc. So it wouldn't move. All right, so this is my outline. So I'm going to start with the introduction, then literature review, the methodology for the study, the results, the discussion, and finally the conclusion. So the introduction, I have already said that. So this is a simplified diagram of the distribution of the H and L varieties. So formal domains in Fishman's terms and informal domain also in Fishman's terms. That is, so you would find Tunisian speakers and Arabs in general use MSA to fill out forms or to write in newspapers, books, poetry, etc. But they only use Tunisian Arabic when speaking with friends, with family, for intimate conversation, for daily activities, for daily conversation. So the division is along lines of function. So the modern standard Arabic, the standardized language, is marked. It is uncomfortable for Tunisians to use in daily conversation, while the Tunisian Arabic is unmarked and very comfortable and is used with ease. So the reason why also this standard language is uncomfortable and is marked is because it enjoys a high degree of prestige due to the history of the language. So modern standard Arabic is characterized by linguistic conservatism due to a very strict standardization process that started from the 11th century AD. With the expansion of the Islamic Empire, there was a need to standardize and to unify the language in order to unify the empire, to tie all those various parts together. And therefore, this language enjoys not only political or geopolitical prestige, but also religious prestige, because it's also linked to the Quran, which is perceived to be the apex of linguistic genius for Arabs, for the Arabic language. What happens is that because this language is very formal and very standard, using or mismatching the two varieties in the two domains would create a sort of clash. And therefore, what Ferguson says is that when someone uses the low variety in a formal domain or the high variety in an informal domain, they would become an object of ridicule. That is, people would laugh at them. And the use of the word ridicule itself is very important because it comes from Latin ridiculous, which means laughable. And when we go back to laughter as a human behavior, we notice that humans are not the only primates who laugh, but also chimpanzees laugh as well. And the reason for laughter for chimpanzees and humans is quite similar. Chimpanzees and other primates and humans laugh when something is incongruous, usually when an activity is aggressive, for example, of rough and tumble, but it is meant as non-serious, that it is not meant to seriously harm anyone. For the similar reasons motivate human laughter. That is, when there is something that is not serious, we laugh at it simply because it is incongruous, unusual, or unreasonable. It is outside of our expectations. Theories of humor have also tried to explain why humans laugh and what do people find humorous. And the most apt theory of humor in this respect is the incongruity theory of humor, which stipulates that humor is the result of a clash of schemas in the brain. When two incongruous or incompatible schemata in the brain clash, and they are non-serious, there will be laughter. So what this paper hypothesizes is that in the diagnostic brain, there is a schema active in every event. This schema has two variables, which allows the diagnostic speaker to select either the H variety or the L variety, depending on the domain. In the case of misselection of variety, there will be a clash that is considered non-serious, and therefore we will laugh. So the three main questions are: does misselecting the H or L variety in an H or L variety domain generate mirthful laughter? Does the perception of humor in the case of variety misselection mean there is a perception of a cognitive incongruity? And what does perceiving a cognitive incongruity in diagnostic code switching or misselection imply? As for the methodology, the participants were 80 individuals, 68 females and 12 males with the average age of 21.5. All of them were native Tunisian speakers, born to and raised by Tunisian parents, and they all went to Tunisian schools in which they received instruction in MSA from the age of 5 until the age of 18. The materials used, the participants used two modified audio clips in which an abrupt change from MSA to TA occurs or from TA to MSA occurs. They were also provided with informed consent questionnaires, a WHO-5 well-being index translated into Arabic by the Psychiatric Research Unit within the Mental Health Center of North Zealand, and they also were provided with general information questionnaire to collect information about their age and gender, and finally with the funniness rating phase scale adapted from Glenwright and Agbayo. So the experiment, so the participants were split into two control groups and two experimental groups. The scoring of their reaction was very simple: 0 for non-reaction, 1 for non-Duchenne smile, 2 for a Duchenne smile, and 3 for laughter. And for the rating scoring, it followed the same scale provided to the participants. Of course, a statistical analysis of by point-by serial correlation test was conducted to gauge for any correlation between the switch and the participants' reaction. So the results are going to be divided into two sections. That is when the switch is from MSA to TA and from TA to MSA. So for the control group, the well-being index score, which gauges the participants' mood. We know that participants are more likely to appreciate humor or to find something funny when they are in a propitious or in a positive mood. So the WHO's index tells us that a score of 13 or below is an indicator of a depressed mood that would likely affect humor appreciation. The audio clip score, the average was 0.35, while the rating average was 1.35. For the experimental group A, the well-being index score was 11.4, the audio clip score was 0.55, and the audio clip rating score was 1.3. So a correlation test was conducted to gauge to see if there is any correlation between laughter and switching from modern standard Arabic to Tunisian Arabic in an inappropriate situation, and it found a weak positive correlation of 0.11. Again, another correlation test was conducted to see whether the participants rated the switch as funny or not, and it also found a weak negative correlation of minus 0.02. Now for the switches in the other direction, that is from switching abruptly from Tunisian Arabic to modern standard Arabic, the score for the index for the control group B was 14.2. The audio clip score was 0.10, while the audio clip rating score was 1.05. For the experimental group B, the index score, the well-being index score was 11.3. The audio clip score was 1.1, and the audio clip rating score was 1.75. Again, a correlation test was conducted, and this time it yielded a statistically significant correlation between switching from TA to MSA and laughing at 0.01 level with a correlation of 0.49. Similarly, a positive correlation was also deduced when switching from TA to MSA, and the rating of participants as the rating of the clip as being funny with 0.24 at 0.06 level. So to move on to the discussion of the results will be centered around two major axes, which is the relevance of the findings against the incongruity theory of humor, upon which this paper is based, and also humor and diglossia will be discussed from a social aspect. So incongruity theory stipulates that laughter is the result of a cognitive appreciation of a sudden contradiction between what is expected to be serious and an ensuing ridiculousness. Hence, the misselection of one variety in a given context will result in ridicule manifest in mirthful displays, which is either smiling or laughter. The results of the experiments have showed that indeed mirthful reactions are more likely to occur when there is a switch. If we compare the 30% mirthful reactions when the switch in TA occurs to 0% when there is no switch, and also 20% compared to 10% when there is a switch in MSA compared when there is no switch. So indeed, mirthful reactions are more likely to occur when there is a switch. The results show that misselecting the H or L variety is likely to result in mirthful displays, and statistics showed also a weak positive correlation between mirthful displays and switching from MSA to TA, compared to a statistically significant correlation when the switch is in the other direction from TA to MSA. And of course, the question here is why? Normally, we would expect from this hypothesis that both switches, both being incongruous, would result in a high correlation. However, there's only one that yielded a positive correlation. The reason is simply because MSA enjoys prestige that is not that TA does not enjoy. MSA is a standardized language that enjoys political, religious, cultural, and economic even prestige, while TA, Tunisian Arabic, is non-standardized. It does not enjoy any prestige, and even it is considered, in Ferguson's terms, by some speakers to not even exist. This is also a point that Sayahi, who is also a Tunisian linguist, who mentioned that there is a diaglossia paradox. In diglossic communities, you would find that diglossic speakers would always venerate the language that they do not speak daily, while they denigrate the language that they transmit to their children. So the stronger support, as we said, is when switching from TA to MSA. Leaky diaglossia is a term coined by Fazelt in 1984, in which one variety slowly seeps into the domains of the other variety. And this is what is currently happening in the Tunisian context, with modern standard Arabic shrinking and being only reserved for writing. And even as we notice more in the Tunisian context, we find that news outlets and media are more and increasingly using TA rather than MSA. And when someone switches to MSA instead, or wants to speak to the people in MSA, there would be this sort of distance. The people would comment that what this person is maintaining a sort of distance, a sort of social distance from us. So what happens is that the reason why switching from TA to MSA is more humorous, because it is a deviation from the norm. That is what is unreasonable. That is what is outside of our expectation. On the other hand, switching from MSA to TA is a return to the norm, is a return to what we know, and is a return to what is expected. So similarly, for their reactions, the experiment also gauged the participants' conscious reactions and conscious rating of what is funny. And what we notice is that there is also a similarity between what they considered switching from TA to MSA more funny, while from MSA to TA to be not as funny, simply because, again, ideologically speaking, the Tunisian speakers still venerate this language that they do not use. They still have this ingrained or hereditary respect for this code, that even though they don't use it on a daily basis. So again, MSA is a venerated variety, not associated with humor, not associated with anything funny, but is associated with that which is serious, which is solemn, which is official, while TA does not enjoy such reverence or such prestige. So the limitation of the study is that, of course, the sample size is small. 80 individuals do not reflect the general population of Tunisia, which is 12 million. Limited resources, of course. Advanced software, such as the FACS software that can read all the minute facial action units, would be even more beneficial for such study. And of course, individual differences. Different individuals have different attitudes towards the two varieties. Of course, a different age group would also have a different attitude towards the variety. An older age group would be more likely to venerate MSA, while an even younger group would be more likely to respect or to feel more of an identity connection with TA rather than MSA. So the conclusion, the main findings of the study showed that a switch from TA to MSA is more likely to result in mirthful displays than a switch from MSA to TA. This is explained by perceived non-conformity to social norms. The ensuing humor is the result of intraschematic incongruity in the values of the variety variable in its particular schema. And these findings support the claim for a cognitive structure for diglossia, which in turn warrants a novel exploration of the diglossic speech community community language use. What we notice is that diglossia has always been studied from a sociolinguistic point of view, not really from a cognitive point of view. It should be treated more as close to bilingualism. The diglossic brain should be studied as a multilingual brain. The representation of the H and L variety is closer to that of L1 and L2. This is a study conducted by Kamis Dakwar and Freud, who conducted a similar study on Palestinian dialect and MSA, and found that MSA is represented cognitively very much like an L2. Of course, this would have implications, pedagogical implications to the teaching of MSA. Unfortunately, in Tunisian schools, MSA is taught as if it is your native language. So students are always expected to already know the language. And of course, they are faced with many hurdles, faced with not achieving fluency. So these are my references, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your very interesting talk. Okay, then for the audience, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask.
So I have a question. Thank you so much for being there.
Thank
It's really interesting because actually me myself too, like I'm a foreigner here.
Yes.
And here in Korea, we not really have the same system, but kind of a little bit similar, because here in Korea they have their Korean language, but it was actually affected a lot by Chinese language. So that's why in Korean language we have a lot of Chinese words, Chinese origin words. And me too, I was wondering, like, in which context Korean people use more Chinese words or less Chinese words. And I think this is kind of like correlates with your work, kind of. And actually, I was wondering, in Tunisia, in schools, do they teach like in Tunisian Arabic or in standard Arabic? Like, how do you
Tunisian Arabic is not taught anywhere at schools. It is only the language of the street, of friends at home. But when you enroll in school at the age of 5 or 6, you start being taught everything in MSA. You start being taught reading, writing, maths, everything in MSA. So you are thrust into this whole world with a new language at the same time. And later on, you start learning certain subjects in French. And later on, you start learning certain subjects in English. So the Tunisian learner is always learning something in a foreign language. You're never learning anything in your native language. So yeah, unfortunately.
And what about, for example, parents? If the kid is misbehaving, will they say something in standard Arabic?
Oh, no, absolutely not. It is very uncomfortable. It is very unusual to use MSA. So MSA is only used basically nowadays. It is only used for filling out forms, for maybe dissertation writing, for official documents. But if you are emotional or if you are casual in your speech, you only use Tunisian Arabic. MSA is also used for prayers, for even formal speeches by presidents and by prime ministers. Nowadays, they are more inclined towards using Tunisian Arabic. And actually, our current president, when he first got elected, he used modern standard Arabic a lot, and he got ridiculed online. And he got attacked online for maintaining this distance with the people. And therefore, he gradually switched to TA. He started using TA, and the more he used Tunisian Arabic, the more he became popular. Yeah.
So when a person speaks standard Arabic, he got laughed by a lot of people, like different ages, right? Or
yes,
younger people tend to laugh more about
it. Both ages, but it's as if it is, for example, if you're going grocery shopping and all of a sudden you start speaking in modern standard Arabic, it's as if you're in Italy, for example, and you start using Latin. It's that same, it's like using a very old variety of the language that no one uses. It's like, for example, using Old English all of a sudden instead of using modern English, for example, or using Old Korean instead of using the modern Korean. It would feel odd. It would feel as if you are a time traveler, for example. So that's the clash. That's the incongruity. Yes.
And what do you think is the perspective of modern standard Arabic? Would it be like, would it left only in Quran, or and people would just like switch casually in Tunisian Arabic and just will teach in Tunisian Arabic everywhere? I mean, as they do it now, but maybe they just like make a book with Tunisian Arabic.
Actually, there have been attempts to codify Tunisian Arabic. There have been attempts to make a corpus. There have been attempts to actually standardize it. But every time linguists make a step forward, they are met with popular rejection. It is the linguists, the Tunisian linguists are aware that Tunisian Arabic is a language on its own, and they want to standardize it and confer the prestige, some prestige to it. But however, the popular opinion is what matters, and the population believes that Tunisian Arabic is not a language. It is a broken Arabic. All right, so they are absolutely against this. There have been attempts to translate certain novels, for example, or poems to Tunisian Arabic. They have been met with rejection, and therefore an attempt to actually start teaching in Tunisian Arabic is a project for the next 100 years, maybe, or the next 200 years, because nowadays it is absolutely out of question. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
At the end of the presentation, you said that there are differences from the perspective and the and the cognition. All do that we have to move on from the person. It inspired me a lot. So I wanted to explain more about the impact differences in relation with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. Well, the idea is that when it comes to diaglossia in the Tunisian context, linguists have always looked at it as a sociolinguistic behavior. It's like as if you're switching register or style or lexicon, not really as a cognitive process. So that is the issue. Is that when linguists have studied diaglossia, they've always looked at it as a behavior rather than a cognitive process, such as switching between languages, such as multilingualism or bilingualism. And that is the problem, is that when you look at the, when you actually observe Tunisian speakers and how they switch from TA to MSA and the difficulty they have when you confront them and when you tell one participant, for example, and I did ask my students this, and I asked one student, go ahead, use modern standard Arabic. And they absolutely froze. And they said, I don't know, I can't, I don't know. It's as if you're asking them to speak in a foreign language. And it is because it is very much like a foreign language. And when you find neurolinguistic studies conducted on other varieties, and you find the representations of the two varieties, of the H variety and the L variety, and how the H variety, modern standard Arabic, behaves very much in the brain, is represented in the brain very much like an L2, you are motivated towards studying diaglossia from a different perspective. You are motivated towards studying it as studying the processes behind it, not just looking at it as a linguistic behavior or as switching a register or switching style, because it's much more complex and much more deep than that. I hope I answered your question. Okay.
질문 끝나셨나요? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you for your great talk. Yeah, Professor Manjor. Okay, then let's move on to the next presentation. Okay, please welcome Tan Arda Gedik from University of Erlangen in Nuremberg. The title of talk is Aligning constructions between Turkish and English, a tale of 4 constructions.
Well, good morning, everyone. Well, it is a good morning for me, but I guess a good afternoon to everyone in Korea. So can everyone hear me well and see my screen? Just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah.
Good. All right, let's get to it. So obviously, we'll be talking about aligning constructions today, and I'm very excited to share this ongoing process of this research paper, if you will. So thank you for having me. So the roadmap it basically follows the outline of a paper. So we will start with an introduction, then we'll talk about the literature review a little bit. We will talk about the constructions, each and every one of them. And then I'll talk about my methodology. Then I'll move on to my equivalence spectrum and the scores, so my analysis. And then I'll talk about the discussions and implications, and then I will answer your questions at the end. All right, so to begin with, construction grammar is somewhat of a different understanding, a different approach to grammar in comparison to traditional approaches to grammar. So when we say traditional approaches, we have things like generative approaches or even valency theory. However, what construction grammar does differently is that it combines form and meaning at the same time. So to give you an example, for example, we have the X or the wire construction here. And here's an example. The more respondents knew about biotechnology, the more misgivings they had about its impact. So what we say here as constructionists is that we have these schemas, and they can be as little as words or as big as very abstract schemas like the ditransitive, or partially filled constructions like the X or the wire construction. And so in such instances, we have these slots that get filled up by different clauses, or sometimes different adjectives, sometimes different verbs, and so on and so forth. So we have the form. And then alongside this form, we have a specific meaning, a specific function. So in the case of the X or the wire construction, it is basically parallelism. As one thing is happening, the other thing is happening too at the same time, more or less. So we know from evidence that constructions emerge in and through frequency and usage events, and they're not necessarily universal in the sense that perhaps generativist approaches would have suggested, but rather they are language specific. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot share universal, some of the constructions cannot share universal properties, but it is a different understanding of what universal means. So we know frequency matters in construction grammar for the most part. And to sketch these constructions, we have something called constructicography. So you could argue that this is something like lexicography, where people go out and they create their dictionaries. In the case of constructicography, what researchers do is they try to capture these constructions, and they can, as I said, they can be as little as words, or they can be as big as highly abstract schemas. And they try to account for these constructions. So far, there hasn't been a lot of construction studies on Turkish. There is a recent paper which I worked on for a number of years. I worked on the evidentiality construction in Turkish, but it is just a teeny tiny step into the world of the Turkish constructicography world. So it is relatively new, and this is an ongoing research project with me and a couple of colleagues. All right, so I mentioned that constructions are not necessarily universal and they are language specific. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that we cannot align them, that we cannot compare them. So for instance, one of the main inspirations for this paper was Lungfelt et al. In 2018, in which Lungfelt and colleagues, they compared or aligned constructions between Brazilian Portuguese Japanese, Swedish, and English. And so following their methodology, it is actually possible to compare constructions even though they are very language specific. So in this study, what I mean with alignment is basically an equivalence spectrum. I don't necessarily try to say that alignment means a one-to-one correspondence, because from a constructionist perspective, that is almost never possible. But we can try to create equivalence spectrums in which there are some constructions, at least this is after this analysis, this is what I suggest. There are some constructions between different languages that are more closely aligned to one another in terms of form and meaning, and there are some other constructions that are not so aligned closely. So then in this study, I focus on the Turkish and English ditransitive, the Turkish and English double intensifier, the Turkish and English evidentiality construction, and finally the Turkish and English motion verb constructions. Excuse me. All right, so let's start with the ditransitives. So when we take a look at the form, which you can see here, they are very similar, except for a couple of formal similarities in which Turkish adopts case marking, and Turkish is obviously an SOV language, whereas English is an SVO language, but this difference does not necessarily cause a lot of problems in terms of analysis. And when it comes to meaning, all of the meanings that we will see in these figures, I have come up with after the analysis, and we will see it in the methodology section. And basically, these two constructions mean X causes Y to receive an object. This can both be metaphorical or real. And so real would be something like I gave him a book, right? A real object. And the metaphorical extension would be something like I told him a story. So there is a cognitive transfer there. All right, let's move on to the double intensifier construction. Now, the double intensifier construction in both languages, they are structurally not so different. While they do have properties of reduplication, such as in English you have here and there, teeny tiny, itsy bitsy. In Turkish, this seems to work more directly using reduplication of the same word again and again. However, there are instances where this is not the case. But for our purposes, I focus on this one, and in both instances, the function of this construction is to intensify the meaning of the repeated item or of the repeated clause. When it comes to the unevidentiality or evidentiality, it depends on how you define it, Turkish and English work quite differently. So Turkish being a agglutinative language, you have a verb construction, so you have a verb, and then you have a suffix, right? So you have something called mush in Turkish, and you can combine the suffix with different verbs to give the meaning of reporting on a directly or indirectly evidenced experienced event. Now, meaning-wise, English has the same construction. However, English seems to have, at least so far, two different levels of constructions, interrelated constructions, if you will. So one of them would be phrasal constructions, in which you have these chunks, it seems that, it seems as if, and there are word level constructions where you just have words such as apparently, clearly, allegedly, and so on. Now, finally, motion verb constructions. They obviously work quite differently. If you've ever read motion verb studies before, you'll know that certain languages encode motion events differently, and Turkish and English definitely do that differently. So Turkish, being a verb-framed language, it tends to use extra clauses or sometimes extra suffixes to give the same meaning or to encode the manner of motion within the verb itself or the clause itself. However, English does not necessarily do that because English has manner of motion verbs more often than Turkish does. So you get things like trudge and waddle, in which you actually understand how the manner of motion was carried out. All right, So the methodology is I used the Opus 2 subtitle corpus on Sketch Engine, which was freely available at the time, at least to me. I'm not sure if they changed things because the European Union has been playing around with a couple of things. And there is a parallel search option in which you can put English as your target, or Turkish for that matter, and then you can look for the equivalent instances. And so what I did was, excuse me, I took 200 lines for each construction in each language, so that would make 400 lines for each construction, which is a total of 1,600. And then I compared the meanings and the functions against available literature on each construction, but sometimes there wasn't enough data, obviously, especially when it comes to the double intensifier, for instance. So for that, I followed the functional analysis method of Atkins and Rundle to not have any biases. All right, so following Linkfeld et al., I have 4 questions to basically create this equivalence spectrum. So the first question is, it's a very basic one. Is there a corresponding construction or perhaps a family of constructions in the target language? So my target language is English and my source language is Turkish. And so the second question is there one construction in the target language that covers the full functional range of the source construction and is not a superordinate construction? So superordinate would, in this sense, mean if you have the ditransitive, so I gave them a book, right? So you have an NP, you have a verb, and you have an object and object. So this would be the superordinate, and anything below that, so if you have things like NP give object, that wouldn't be a superordinate. That would be a lower level construction. It's not really necessary for our conversation here, but it is still important to put it out there. So that's also what we looked at, and this is unidirectional. So as I said, this is from Turkish onto English. And the third question is, are the source construction and the closest target construction formally similar? So we look at the syntactic patterns, except for lexical differences, because obviously languages have different lexical items. And finally, do all formal differences follow from other constructions, not of the same type as the source target constructional pair? And this basically means that are they more or less on par with one another in terms of meaning? And then I scored each and every one of them. So you would have 1 point for each. And the first question was like perhaps a blocking question in which if the answer was no to this, then no further questions were asked. Oh, excuse me. Okay, let's go back. There we go. So you can see here the scores, right? So obviously, is there a corresponding construction or set of constructions? Yes, in all of the instances, we do have a corresponding construction. So languages can convey the same information, albeit in different ways. So we do have corresponding constructions. Is there one construction in the target language that covers the full functional range and is not a superordinate construction? In this scenario, they were all superordinate constructions. And so because of that, they all got zeros. The third question is, are the source construction and the closest target construction formally similar, except for lexical differences? So formally being the syntactic patterns, and the only question, the only construction that got 1 is the ditransitive, because they are very similar in terms of their patterning. However, all the others are very different. And I didn't necessarily give 1 to evidentiality, double intensifier, even though it used reduplication, because there were different instances where in English, you wouldn't call it reduplication, like teeny tiny. It's not necessarily the reduplication of the same word, right? And finally, do all formal differences follow from other constructions, not of the same type as the source target constructional pair? Double intensifier got 1, and the ditransitive got 0.5. And we have a total of, as you can see, the ditransitive getting 2.5, 2, 1, and 1. Now, these scores may not necessarily mean anything at the moment, but when we get to the spectrum, it starts to make more sense. So at least in this experimental work, creating the spectrum, you have high equivalence where you get higher scores for certain constructions. And then you have a low equivalence end in which the constructions do not necessarily have high scores. So if we put Turkish up and English above, we start to see that the ditransitive seems to be more closely aligned between Turkish and English in terms of how we encode the same. And this makes a lot of sense because when you take a look at Goldberg 1995, she talks a lot about the ditransitive construction in detail. And one of the things that she says is the ditransitive construction is one of the most universally available constructions across languages because people want to give somebody something, right? So this is a very human thing to do. So that's one of the things, that's probably one of the reasons why we tend to see the ditransitive construction being more closely aligned. Then the scores follow, right? We have the double intensified construction, evidentiality, and motion verb constructions. So obviously motion verb constructions are going to be at the end because Turkish and English, they encode a manner of motion very differently. Turkish being a verb framed language, it uses different clauses, converbs, suffixes to give the same meaning, whereas English already has readily available, accessible lexical items that give the same manner of motion. All right, so then, okay, great, but what does this mean? Why do we need this? So one of the beliefs in generativist approaches, which I kind of touched upon at the beginning, was that languages have universal properties, which, while yes, they do, perhaps, they may all have NPs and they may all have things that look a little bit like verbs and stuff. We tend to think that languages from different families tend to be extremely different unless they're very closely aligned. I don't necessarily think, especially after this analysis, I don't necessarily think that they're that different, but rather there are instances where they actually get very close. However, we cannot generalize these properties to the whole of language, but rather specific instances of these constructions, right? I believe such an equivalent spectrum in the future, obviously with a lot more research studies, might help with foreign language teaching, because one of the things, I have been an English teacher and I've taught many Turkish speakers of English. And one of the things that they really struggle, both cognitively and also in any different part of language production, is, for example, motion verb constructions or evidentiality, in which we see that the two languages are not necessarily that closely aligned. So students may not be able to recognize the formal similarities or the meaning similarities. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean I'm suggesting or advocating for grammar translation methods or anything. However, it might be useful to prepare a guideline in the future using such equivalent spectrums. This obviously opens up a lot more possibilities for constructicography studies in the future, and it opens up different horizons for contrastive or typological studies. This might also be of help for translation studies, in which if you've ever translated anything between two different languages, you sometimes get stuck and you're like, oh my God, how do I say this? And so perhaps in the future, if there is an online version of this in which you type in the ditransitive for English and then the Turkish pops up, it might be of help for translators. But obviously this is very hypothetical at the moment. Now, there are obviously some limitations. It is time consuming and difficult, right? You have to sit down, you have to capture these constructions, you have to hunt data. My analysis also lacks constructions. And what I mean with that is, we know from evidence, for instance, that in the English ditransitive, the verb give has the highest frequency, almost 50% of the time. And we know from two studies, one replication and one OG study, that students, even at advanced levels, they may transfer strongly attracted items to such constructions from their L1 to the L2. For instance, Koshla and Stefanovic, in the German study for the ditransitive, they found that German speakers of English tend to favor sentences such as, I explain you the book, even though explain in English does not necessarily occur with the ditransitive. So if we show collostructions in such a framework, it might also be of help for translators or foreign language students. And finally, all the functions and meanings of all constructions selected may not have been covered fully, because this is only a paper, a conference paper. There is still a lot to do to cover their functions and meanings fully. All right, so here are my references, and thank you so much for listening to me. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you for a really interesting talk. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments, yeah, please ask.
발표 너무 잘 들었습니다. 네.
Yeah, thank you. We really enjoyed your presentation.
증거성이라는 용어에 대해서
Yes, there is a question from the audience. Can you please explain more about evidentiality? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Yes, no, it's fine. I just realized. What about evidentiality? So what's the question? I don't think I got it.
그냥 전체적으로요. There's the high and lower like levels. Can you please like explain what's the difference?
Okay, so let me share my screen again, and then we can talk about it. Just give me a second.
Sure.
I think you can see my screen again.
Yes.
So are we talking about this one here?
Yes. Yes.
Aha. Okay, good. So what we mean with superordinate constructions and lower level constructions is, I think it's somewhere available in the conference paper. So it might be helpful to actually see it. I didn't put it in the presentation because it was going to take time. However, the idea is that you have a superordinate construction. So the evidentiality. So let's just assume that this is the English construction. And in this superordinate construction, it's almost like a mother, right? So it has all the instances of, it seems that apparently, and all the possible combinations. And as you go down, as you go to lower level constructions, you start to have differentiations between them. So one of the strands is phrasal constructions. And this comes from the fact that, I didn't necessarily mention it, but construction grammar takes each surface level to be different constructions. So it seems that, and apparently, although yes, they both mean evidentiality, they both encode the same meaning, and they are interrelated, they have the same mother, if you will, they're not necessarily the same construction because they have a different syntactic pattern. But as I said, so you have a phrasal construction, it seems that it's a chunk, and then you have word level constructions apparently and clearly. And so, as I said, these are in the same family of evidentiality constructions, and they are related to one another, but they're not superordinate because they're not highly schematic, perhaps you could say. I hope that answers their question, but please do ask me more if it doesn't.
혹시 답이 되셨나요? Okay, yes, thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, if you have no more questions, then let's move to our next presentation. Thank you so much. You're very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Okay, our next presentation is Professor Minju Kim from Claremont McKenna University. I'm sorry, Claremont McKenna College. Yeah. And the title of talk is a corpus-based study of Korean extenders. And I think it will be shown with the pre-recorded presentation.
So let me explain a little bit. The title of the talk is a corpus-based study of Korean general extenders. I think there was a typo on the abstract. 안녕하세요. 클레몬 맥케나 대학에서 온 김민주입니다. I flew all the way here from LA to present, but upon arrival, I developed a health issue. And as you can hear, I lost my voice. So I'm very sorry to inform this, but I think the best way is just by playing my pre-recorded presentation. At the end of the video, I will take your questions. I apologize, and I deeply, deeply appreciate your understanding. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here. Thank you. So will you have 거기서 동영상을 트시겠어요? 제가
네, 여기서 동영상을 공유하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 혹시 잘 안 보이시거나 안 들리시면 말씀해 주세요. 보이시나요? 네.
Recent studies have demonstrated that general extenders such as English and stuff and or something carry important interactional functions in conversation. General extenders come in two kinds. First are adjunctive general extenders that start with and, such as and stuff and things. For example, we used to go to movies together and stuff. Second are disjunctive general extenders that start with or, such as or something, or anything, or whatever. For example, we can have a sandwich or something. Overstreet 1999 coined the term general extenders. According to her, they are general, for instance, and stuff instead of and stupid and bureaucratic stuff like that. And they are mostly attached at the end of utterance, so they extend otherwise grammatically complete utterances. Previous studies on general extenders focused mostly on Indo-European languages, as the list in one shows. So to fill the gap in the literature, in this study, I will examine Korean general extenders. Korean adjunctive general extender is go, 그래, consisting of go and 그래 and be, do, like that. And Korean disjunctive general extender is 거나 그래, consisting of 거나 or and 그래. Please note that Korean is a verb final language, and its general extender consists of a connective and a demonstrative predicate. On the other hand, in the case of English, its general extender consists of a connective and a noun phrase with a demonstrative. I initially planned to present both on disjunctive and adjunctive general extenders. However, due to time constraints, in this study, I will only present on adjunctive general extenders. My previous study on disjunctive general extender has been published, so you can refer to this study. In my study for the adjunctive general extenders, I used 129 natural conversation data, as well as the theoretical frameworks of grammaticalization and intersubjectification. From now on, I will say GE instead of general extenders. Previous studies on English GEs mostly treat them as listing constructions. For instance, Jefferson argued that speakers who are aware that lists should occur in 3 parts utilize them to fill the 3rd slot when they fall short. For instance, the store sells stationeries like a pen, pencil, and stuff. However, Overstreet rebuffs that argument, saying as much as 74% of English GEs in her data occur with only 1 item, for instance, pen and stuff. In my Korean data as well, 79% of the adjunctive GEs occur with 1 item. So these findings suggest that the main function of GEs is not listing items. Instead, they are mainly employed for interactional functions. The original meaning of adjunctive GEs is to implicate there is unstated more of the same category as the presented examples. Example 2 illustrates this using Korean. Here A asks, 대학 때 그럼 사귄 애들은 지금 어스틴에 있나? And B replies, 오스틴에 있고 샌안토니오에 있고 그래요. Here, 고 그래 and stuff implicates other major cities in Texas, such as Houston and Dallas. In this study, I will demonstrate that extended from that original meaning, Korean 고 그래 can carry different interactional functions, such as evoking solidarity, hedging, expressing repetition, a downgrading stance, intensity, and a criticizing stance. Recent studies on adjunctive GEs in English and other languages also demonstrated that they can carry some of the same functions, such as evoking solidarity, hedging, and expressing a downgrading stance and intensity. When they express a downgrading stance, and stuff can be replaced by and shit or unso Kram in German. When it expresses the intensity, it can be replaced by and all and everything or à tout in French. Overstreet and others argue that the primary function of adjunctive GEs is evoking solidarity. Speakers cannot use and stuff if they believe that the hearer cannot infer what it implies. Hence, its use signals, I assume you know what I mean by and stuff, based on our shared knowledge and experience. And it indicates the speaker's willingness to treat the hearer as an in-group member. Hence, adjunctive Gs are intrinsically intersubjective, and when used for evoking solidarity, they often occur with expressions like, you know, in English. Korean 고 그래 also often collocates with the G and jana, which means, you know. Example 3 illustrates how Korean 고 그래 is used for evoking solidarity. In 3, 2 Korean mothers of infants living in the US are talking about Korean folk remedies. In Korea, when a baby has a digestion problem, mothers often feed them rice porridge and barley water instead of formula. American pediatricians do not know such alternative remedy, and this frustrates the mothers, especially B, whose baby is sick right now. 1. 얘네들은 솔직히 모르지. 미국 애들은 그냥 없지 않니? 한국처럼 뭐 쌀을 갖다 이렇게 먹이고 그런 게 없잖아. Lines 1 through 3. B builds personal connection with A using G and jana. What 고 그래 implies in feeding rice porridge and stuff, 쌀을 갖다 이렇게 먹이고 그런 거, is additional substitute for formula such as barley water, which A, a fellow Korean mom, should know. B's use of 고 그래 shows B's assumption that A knows this culturally specific knowledge and hence evokes solidarity between them and prompts A to align with B. General extenders are vague expressions and hence can function as hedging device. In 4, B says, 나 살 무지 빠지고 있잖아. 운동 부족이야. A. 너 뭐 운동도 좀 하고 그래라 야. B. 응. Here, A asks 고 그래 to make his suggestion less of an imposition. Studies observe that when adjunctive GEs are used for interactional functions, they can occur even in the context where there is no unstated more. In the case of 3 as well, there is no inferable unstated more, because B identified lack of exercise as the cause of his weight loss, and A simply replies that please exercise. And hence here, 고그래 simply functions as a hedging device. Next, 고그래 can mark repetition, translatable as and so on. And marking repetition has not been discussed in GEs of other languages. In 5, A describes her daughter's breathing problem, and she says, 숨이 안 쉬어진대요, 자기 말은. 안 쉬어지고 있다가 한꺼번에 그냥 그렇게 크게 숨을 쉬고 그러거든요. Undoubtedly, the repetition of take a big breath twice enhances the sense of repetition. But without such a repetition, 고, 그래 alone can encode the meaning as well. In example 6, A explains why he feels distant from one of his professors. A says, 근데 그 사람한테는 왜 자꾸 거리감이 있지? 딱 이렇게 인사를 해도 있지. 반갑게 안 하고 그냥 툭 하고 지나가고 그래. 그래가지고 아직은 거리감이 있어. In line 5, the use of a present tense shows the described event is a present habitual, which happens regularly. Here, 고그래 indicates that the blunt greeting of the professor is not a one-time instance, but repeated one. Next, 고그래 can express a downgrading stance. Overstreet observes that English and stuff can indicate the speaker's downgrading or trivializing stance. The unstated more that and stuff implies has a low value because it is predictable, mundane, and not worth explicit mentioning. For example, we usually have something simple for lunch, sandwich and stuff. In the case of Korean, because 고 그래 can denote the meaning of repetition, common in my data are examples where speakers use it to convey their downgrading stance toward the mundane repetition of daily life. Take 7, for example. In line 1, B asks, 요새 강의는 뭐 2학기 때 뭐 듣고? And A answers, 이번에는 그냥 쉬고 있어요. 강의 못 듣고. A is not proud of his current situation as revealed by the use of 그냥, just, and 못, unable. Then in line 3, B paraphrases A's answer in a more neutral tone by removing 그냥 and 못. He says, 강의 안 듣고. And in lines 5 and 6, A further elaborates his daily routine by saying, 그냥 나가서 책 좀 보고 논문 하나 쓰고 있고 그렇죠. He continued to present them as trivial. He's 그냥 나가서 책 좀 보고 논문 하나 쓰고 있고 그렇죠. Here, using 고그래, A implies that he is doing more of the same sort of activities he has already mentioned. At the same time, 고그래 conveys A's downgrading stance toward his mundane daily activities. Next example is taken from 삼시세끼.
뭐 하셨어요?
나 계속 뭐 쉬는 내내 호준이 생각하고 그랬지 뭐. 딱히 뭐 할 게 없더라 그래서 꾸준히 생각하고.
This clip is funny because the serious and intense 계속 쉬는 내내 호준이 생각하 is juxtaposed with the trivializing 고 그래. Tekova and others show that English and stuff and all and everything and French étude can function as intensifiers. This is the case for Korean 고 그래 as well. In 9, B describes his car accident, which he caused while driving drunk. And B says, 거기 올라갔다 내려와 갖고 타이어 2개가 빵꾸 나고 막 그랬어. And A says, 야, 그렇게? 잘 좀 해라. In this usage, 고 그래 often collocates with mark, a discourse marker expressing intensity and indiscrimination. So the combination 고 막 그래 can be translated as and all this stuff. 고 그래 is a useful tool when the speaker has to describe a chaotic or hectic situation where many details are simultaneously involved, such as car accident, but the speaker can expect the hearer can envision the secondary details without explicit listing. Through such use, it started to function as an intensifier, often used in chaotic and intense situations. The unstated mode that 고 그래 originally implies now encodes intensity, which is more in degree or quality rather than in quantity. And the phrase with 고 그래 usually appears at the end of utterance and does not receive much prosodic stress. But when it conveys intensity, it can do. In 10, A describes a rich woman, C. C is so rich in the US that her sister from Korea recently visited her 3 times and stayed for 3 months each time. And these are just long stays. And A and B are talking about that.
와가지고 뉴스 일본이 나왔다. 뭐 석 달씩 있다가 그랬더니 와가지고.
Here, the figure 1 shows a spectrogram of example 10. The black arrow shows the prosodic stress. 그랬대네. 석 달씩 있다가고 그랬대네. Lastly, 고 그래 can express a criticizing stance. We have observed that 고 그래 can add a sense of intensity and chaos. Extended from that function, it can encode the speaker's criticizing stance toward an interlocutor who creates a chaos. This has become a conventional usage occurring only in a question form. Take 11 for example. A says, 우리 사진이나 찍어볼래? B, 됐어. Then A took a picture without B's consent, and B teasingly criticized A by saying, 왜 사진을 찍고 그래? 3 pieces of evidence shows that 고 그래 is being conventionalized as a mark of criticism. First, 고 그래 indicates B's criticizing stance and not unstated more, since nothing else exists beyond taking a picture. Second, 고 그래 is used in present tense even though the problematic behavior, i.e. taking a picture, has already occurred. But nevertheless, we do not say, why did you take a picture and stuff? Lastly, as in 11, 왜 사진을 찍고 그래? It is necessary to incorporate a question word, 왜, to make the criticizing question. However, as this usage has become conventional, the question word can be omitted as in 12. In 12, 3 male friends are eating at a restaurant and they spotted a woman sitting with a Buddhist monk. And they became curious about them, and A turned his head to look at the woman. And this drew the woman's attention, and she looked back at them and then had an eye contact with B. And startled by this, B criticized A, saying, 근데 고개를 돌리고 그러냐? 사람 민망하겠지. 눈 마주쳤잖아. And then A says, 뭘 그렇게 민망해 하냐? 얘 또 너무 귀여운 거 아니야? Here, without 왜, the translation of line 2 into English does not make sense. 그러니까, but do you turn your head? 고 그래? It should be, but why did you turn your head? 고 그래? However, this is fine in Korean because the main proposition of line 2 is an accusation toward A's action and not an inquiry of A's reason for his action. And A understood B's utterance as a criticism, and A replies with a counterattack. 뭘 또 그렇게 민망해 하냐? 얘 또 너무 귀여운 거 아니야? To recap, go gray is conventionalized as a marker of criticism, and consequently, the following three features are possible. First, use of go gray, even though there is no inferable more in the context. Second, use of a present tense instead of past tense. And third, omission of a question word. In conclusion, in this study, I identified different functions of Korean GE, 고그래, in conversation. And in doing so, I tried to contribute to cross-linguistic comparisons of GEs beyond Indo-European languages. I also propose grammaticalization and intersubjectification as theoretical frameworks to account for the development of GEs. The functional extension of 고그래 to evoking solidarity, polite hedging, and criticizing stance are instances of intersubjectification, and its functional extension to downgrading stance and intensifier are instances of subjectification. Lastly, this study has published in the journal Pragmatics in May of this year. If you are interested, here is the reference. And thank you so much for your attention and for bearing with my creaky and lost voice. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I cannot see you. I can only see my. Okay, now I can see.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. There is some problem. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Kim, especially although you have some emergent health issues, we are deeply appreciated for your dedication to attending the conference. Okay, so for the audience, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask.
이 한국말로 하시면
네, 한국말로 하세요.
한국말로 하시면
네.
영어로 또 할 거예요?
아니요. 자, 잠깐만요. 제가 한국말로 대답할 수 있거든요. 근데 잘 안 들려요. 혹시 마이크로 물어보실 수 있으실까요?
이쪽으로 괜찮으시면 네, 죄송합니다. 저희가
네, 재밌는
교수님.
잘 들었고요. definitely 뭐 한다고 그래 인텍셔널 펑션이 있는 건 뭐 분명하고 그래서 너무 재밌게 잘 들었는데 한 가지 꼭 고그레어가 이제 뭐 리스팅의 의미를 가지고 있다는 거의 관점에서 이제 뭐 그 퀀티티의 의미로 연결 짓고 그거를 이제 뭐 크리티시즘이나 무슨 뭐 다른 기능까지 이렇게 다 익스텐드하는 걸로 이렇게 얘기했는데 사실상 그러니까 고그레가 꼭 리스팅에서 이렇게 퀀티티를 얘기한다기보다는 어떤 그 하나의 그러니까 어떤 그룹 그래서 그 앞에 있는 아이템이 그 그룹의 하나라는 거를 얘기하는 것 같기도 하거든요.
맞아요, 교수님.
네.
맞아요. 그래서 그거
그래서 그 번역을 할 때 and 뭐 stop라기 오히려 그렇게 번역하기보다는 why do you do such a thing as가 오히려 더 정확한 번역일 것 같아요.
그러니까 크리티시즘으로 쓰였을 때 교수님
그렇죠. 그러니까 뭐 크리티시즘일 경우도 그렇지만 다른 경우도 그럴 수 있을 것 같은데 아까 이제 크리티시즘의 경우에 그 영어 번역을 제가 보다가 생각이 난 게 그 컨텍스트에서는 오히려 Why do you do such a thing as? 그래서
맞아요.
지금 네가 하고 있는 게 내가 비난하는 어떤 여러 부류 중에 거기에 들어간다는 거를 얘기하는 게 아닐까.
맞아요.
그래서 그게 퀀티티하고 관계가 있을까? 좀 그런 생각이 들었습니다.
아니요, 그건 퀀티티가 아니라 퀄리티가 되는 것 같아요. 그래서 인텐스 제가 잠깐 중간에 설명을 했었는데 제 생각에는 그게 인텐서파이어로 쓰이잖아요. 그러니까 막 차가 빵꾸 나고 막 그랬어. 인텐서파이어로 막 많이 쓰이다 보니까 chaotic situation에서 막 일일이 다 차 빵꾸 나고 뭐 에어백 터지고 막 이렇게 경찰 오고 이렇게 다 리스팅하기보다는 빵꾸 나고 막 그랬어. 차 사고 나고 막 그랬어. 이렇게 말하면 다른 사람들이 다 거기 디테일을 알고 그러니까 그게 chaotic situation에서 더 많이 쓰이다 보니까 그게 어떤 그 relationship이 생겨가지고 이런 chaos를 만드는 너 왜 그렇게 chaos를 만들고 그래? 왜 사진을 찍고 그래? 너 왜 그래? 너 그런 왜 사진을 찍고 그래? 그게 그런 그러니까 chaotic intensifier function에서 온 것 같아요. 그래서 이건 quality지 quantity는 아닌 것 같아요. 그 교수님 그 translation이 잘 안 됐어요. 제가 선생님한테 먼저 보여드렸으면 그 translation 했을 텐데 제가 정말로 publish 할 때는 그냥 그 글에 그대로 했어요. 그건 NSW로 번역이 안 돼요. 네, 맞아요.
네. 그래서 이게 차라리 그냥 such a thing, 그러니까 지금 내가 리터하고 있는 액티비티가 어떤 부류의 것 중에 하나인데 그 부류라는 거는 컨텍스트에 따라서 크리티시즘이 될 수도 있고 아니면 또 다른 게 될 수도 있는 것 같아서 그런 느낌이 들었고 그다음에 이거는 이제 고글하고는 전혀 관계없는 얘기인데 그 뭐뭐 하잖아요를 번역할 때 뭐라고 한 다음에 맨 처음에 you know 이렇게 보통 이제 뭐뭐 하잖아를 이제 you know로 만약에 번역하잖아요.
네.
근데 어떤 경우에는 차라리 그게 꼭 그러니까 한국어에는 잔아의 끝에 나오지만 영어로 얘기할 때는 차라리 you know가 앞에 오는 게 더 자연스러울 것 같아요. You know this. 네, 그래서 그것도 번역을 할 때 좀 더 내추럴한 영어로
근데 그렇게 내추럴한 영어로 번역을 해서 전어를 보내잖아요. 그러면 리뷰하시는 분들이 꼭 그걸로 꼬투리를 잡으시는 분들이 있어요. 그걸로 꼬투리를 네가 너무 마음대로 너무 리버럴하게 막 네 주장을 하기 위해서 너무 많이 막 번역을 네 맘대로 네 아규먼트를 위해서 너무 이상하게 리터럴 미닝을 안 하고 너무나 다른 미닝으로 하고 있다. 그런 꼬투리를 잡으시는 경우가 있어가지고 그냥 조금 좀 맞아요, 교수님. 근데 선생님 말씀하시는 거 맞아요.
잘 들었습니다.
감사합니다. 코멘트 감사합니다, 교수님.
If you don't mind, can I ask a question?
네.
예. 한국어로 해도 괜찮을까요?
네.
예. 이게 저의 인투이션상으로 이게 좀 말이 안 되는 걸 수도 있긴 한데요. 그냥 제가 글에 대한 여러 가지 이제 굉장히 재미있는 임피리컬 데이터를 쭉 이제 보여주셨을 때 제가 좀 머릿속에 떠오른 어떤 그런 관련성이 어떤 그 프로그레시브화의 어떤 그런 베리언트가 아닐까. 그러니까 그 디스코스 마커로서의 역할이 그 글에가 약간 그 프로그레시브하고도 관련이 있는 것 같다라는 생각이 들었습니다. 근데 이제 그 글에라는 것이 에나포릭 프레디케이트이기 때문에 선행하는 그 어떤 수러에 대한 어떤 이벤트라든지 그런 속성들을 다시 이렇게 레퍼백하는 어떤 그런 역할을 하는 것이고 그 글의 자체의 어떤 역할은 네, 어떤 에스펙트와 관련이 있는 것이 아닐까라는 인투이션이 좀 들었습니다. 예.
예, 제가 논문을 쓰면서 정확하게 그 생각을 했어요. 그러니까 우리나라에서 글에는 꼭 그 아나포릭한 게 없어도 돼요. 얘기할 때 그게 좀 그렇지 않니? 그게 좀 그래. 그러면 그게 우리가 다 아는 거예요. 그러니까 intersubjective한 거예요. 그래가 아나포릭하게 꼭 literally 더 앞에 뭐는 선행 명사나 이런 게 동사가 있을 필요 없이 네가 내 마음을 알잖아 하는 그런 intersubjective한 미닝이 많기 때문에 그게 좀 그렇지 않아? 그럼 사람들이 다 아는 거예요. 그리고 그래가 꼭 그 리스팅 컨스트럭션을 안 쓰고 그게 프로그레시브로 정말 쓰여요. 그래서 특히나 이게 크리티시즘으로 쓰였을 적에 사진을 찍고 그래. 그러면 네가 지금 사진을 찍고 있다라는 네가 그 프로그레시브 미닝이 아닐까라는 생각을 저도 좀 했었어요. 근데 그러면 그걸 어떻게 세퍼레이트 하는 거예요. 그렇죠? 이 아규먼트를 만들 때, 이 논문을 쓰기 위해서 아규먼트를 만들 때 이것만 동사의 기능이 있는 것 같다 라고 하면 또 너무 힘들어지는 거예요. 그래서 분명히 그 생각은 했어요, 선생님. 그래서 다음에 제가 또 논문을 쓴다면 그 면을 보고 쓸 수 있겠죠. 근데 이 논문에서는 조금 너무 많이 간다. 벌써 그 워드 리밋이 벌써 지났는데 그것까지 내가 할 수는 없다. 그래서 그만뒀어요. 네, 많은 코멘트 주세요.
선생님 또 질문 있으시다고 해서 253 선생님께서 아이고.
제가 아까 그 퀄리티를 잘못 보고 얘기를 했는데 그 3.3에 보면 이제 more in quantity에서 downgrading 스탠스가 있고 그다음에 3.4에 more in quality에서 하나는 intensify하고 하나는 이제 criticizing 스탠스 이렇게 두 개를 나눴잖아요.
네.
지금 제가 보니까 그 intensifier로 사용될 때 오히려 차라리 more in quantity가 더 맞는 말이 아닐까 싶어요. 그러니까 지금 막 자동차 사고가 나서 막 이런 일이 생기고 이런 일이 생기고 그게 인텐시파이가 되려면 여러 가지 일이 많이 생겼다라는 거를 더 강조를 하려고 하고 그래요. 그래서 차라리 거기는 모인 퀀터티가 오히려 더 적합하지 않을까 그런 생각이 들었어요.
근데 그건 맞는 말씀인데 제가
그다음에 이그샘플도 10번 이그샘플 보면 언니가 뭐 와가지고 3번이나 왔다 갔어 뭐 그다음에 석 달씩 있다가 그랬으니까 여러 번 왔. 네.
제가 쉐어 스크린을 해가지고 그 파워포인트를 보여드리려고 했었어요.
네네네. 예, 여러 번 오기도 하고 한 번에 와서 길게 가기도 하고 그래서 이게 인텐시파이어라는 거는 사실 퀀터티하고 더 관련이 있을 것 같지 않을까 좀 그런 생각이 들었는데.
근데 이게 걔 언니가 와가지고 3번이나 왔다 3번씩 가고 그랬대네 이렇게 말했을 적에 벌써 3번 와서 석 달씩 있었다고 한 게 끝나는 거예요. 더 이상 어떤 디테일이 있는지를 잘 모르겠는 것 같아요. 그래서
두 개가 지금 연결되는 거라서 3번이나 왔다 뭐 석 달씩 있다 가고 그래서 이거 두 가지를 다 리퍼를 하는 것 같거든요. 그러니까 한 번은 그 프리퀀시가 많다는 거를 얘기했고 한 번은 그 스테이어블 랭스 오브 스테이가 더 많다는 거를 얘기해서 그런 인텐시파이어의 경우는 퀄리티에 어필하는 것보다는 오히려 퀀터티에 어필을 하는 게 더 낫다는 생각이 좀 들었어요. 아까 자동차 사고도 마찬가지고 이런 많은 일들이 일어났어라고 강조하기 위해서 그래서 그게 많다라는 것이 더 적합하지 않을까. 이제 제 인터프리테이션은 그런 것 같아요.
그 부분에서는 제가 조금 다른 것 같아요. 선생님 저는 퀄리티 같아요. 그게 이 사람이 이걸 더 그래서 막이 들어오는 것 같아요. 분명히 여러 가지 많은 디테일이 막 섞여 있었기 때문에 이걸 쓰는 건 맞지만 나중에 더 문법화가 된 상황에서 더 subjectification이 된 상황에서는 제가 볼 때는 그냥 quality, intensity를 보는 게 그리고 또 예문 하나 더 있었던 게 그 어떤 극성 맞은 엄마가 있었어요. 그래서 이 극성 맞은 엄마하고 그 딸이 음대를 가려고 막 너무 막 셈으로 연습하고 막 그랬어요. 그러면 연습한 거 말고의 그 나머지 퀀티티는 모르겠어요. 근데 거기서 막이 들어가고 그건 제 생각에서는 조금 제가 다른 예문들을 봤을 때 분명히 퀀티티의 면이 있어요. 그 퀀티티의 면이 있었기 때문에 퀄리티, 인텐시파이어가 될 수 있었어요. 그렇지만 저는 벌써 인텐시파이어의 기능이 있기 때문에 그리고 그게 criticizing function하고 조금 연결이 되기 때문에 제가 생각할 때는 퀄리티로 보는 게 조금 제 마음에는 편했어요. 다른 질문 있으세요?
다른 질문은 없으신 것 같습니다. 네.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your great talk. Okay, thank you for our presenters today, and thank you to the participants for attending the session. Okay, we hope you enjoy the remainder of the conference.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.